Before the first light of dawn touched the sleepy suburban streets of Champlin, Minnesota, a black SUV slowly crawled down a quiet road, its headlights dimmed, the false red-blue police lights blinking faintly. Inside, Vance Luther Boelter, 57 years old, sat in eerie calm, wearing a police uniform and a silicone mask molded to look like an average white officer. The mask gave him a blank, soulless appearance, emotionless, inhuman. He had prepared for this for months. In his small rented garage, he had rehearsed putting on the uniform, drawing his gun, reciting fake credentials. His mind buzzed not with nerves, but with conviction. He checked the list on his lap, laminated, highlighted, and blood-red at the edges, 70 names, each marked with labels: pro-choice advocate, federal gun control sponsor, leftist figurehead. He wasn't just killing, he believed he was cleansing the system, conducting a revolution. His first target, Senator John Hoffman. He gripped the wheel tighter, whispered a prayer not to a god but to justice, and drove into darkness. Senator Hoffman's household had just begun to stir when the knock came. Yvette Hoffman, still in her robe, cautiously approached the front door. It was an ordinary Wednesday. She had planned to make coffee, read the newspaper, prepare for her Zoom meeting. The uniformed man outside looked official, calm, and said, "Police. Open up. Urgent matter." She cracked the door open. What followed was a storm of violence. Without hesitation, Boelter raised his gun and fired. The shots were surgical. John Hoffman took 9 bullets, Yvette 8, as she instinctively shielded their daughter with her body. Blood sprayed the cream-colored hallway walls. Their teenage daughter, screaming, grabbed her phone and dialed 911, but her voice trembled into static. Neighbors would later recount hearing nothing, only the sudden roar of an engine as Boelter sped away. It all happened in less than 90 seconds. A family torn apart. A democracy wounded. Vance moved like a ghost across the suburbs. He knew every back road, every camera blind spot. He had pre-programmed coordinates into a burner GPS. Inside the SUV was an arsenal: AK-47s, handguns, rope, body armor, tactical knives, and protein bars. He was ready for days in the field. As he drove, he switched frequencies on his police scanner and heard the first reports of a domestic shooting in Champlin. He laughed bitterly. Domestic? No, he muttered. It's political. His mission was clear: not rage, not chaos, but what he believed was moral execution. His next stop was Representative Kristen Bonner's home in Maple Grove. She was second on the list. Her photo was circled in red. Underneath, he had written, "Voice of compromise, must be silenced." Kristen Bonner never heard the knock. She'd been awake late, working on policy notes, and had fallen asleep on the couch with the television still flickering. Her Ring doorbell camera caught the black SUV pulling in, the fake cop walking up, knocking twice. Then waiting. He stood in eerie silence for 27 seconds, his gloved hand brushing the sidearm at his hip. The camera showed him pause, glance around, then return to his vehicle. His body language was confident, deliberate. Police would later review this footage, realizing how close she came to being victim number 3. Kristen would be informed hours later and collapse in disbelief. "He was at my door," she whispered. "I was supposed to die last night." Still high on adrenaline, Boelter drove through winding streets toward Senator and Rest's house. He had memorized her schedule, stalked her social media, even attended one of her public town halls in disguise months earlier. He knew she was usually home by midnight. As he pulled up, headlights pierced the silence. A patrol car cruised by. The officer, unaware of the danger, waved at and Rest's house, then slowly drove away. Boelter froze. His pulse quickened, not in fear, but rage. "The state protects its own," he hissed. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, panic swirling with frustration. He turned the car around and drove into the darkness, silently cursing fate. Boelter drove in silence for over 40 minutes, his mind spiraling. The timing, the interruptions, were they random, or had the state caught on? He stopped at a remote gas station, purchased a cheap hoodie and sunglasses, changed his shirt, and threw his fake badge into a dumpster behind the store. Surveillance footage later revealed him pacing by the restroom, muttering to himself. His manifesto had timelines, his hit list ranked in urgency. Next was House Speaker Melissa Hortman. He believed she was the linchpin of legislative corruption. He had studied her every move. She was always on time, always in bed by 2. He had underlined it in his notes 3 times, routine kills. Melissa and Mark Hortman were still awake, having just finished watching a documentary on civil rights. Their home was filled with framed photos, children, campaign rallies, Christmas dinners. When the knock came, Mark peeked through the curtains. "Police," he whispered to Melissa. She nodded and followed him to the door. Boelter stood with his hands behind his back, mimicking authority. As the door opened, he fired point blank. Melissa was struck in the chest, falling backward onto the stairs. Mark tried to reach for her, but another volley of shots knocked him down. Neighbors said it sounded like fireworks, but there was no celebration. Boelter stepped inside, looked around at their photos, and whispered, "Corruption dies with silence." Then he vanished again. Authorities found the abandoned SUV within hours. Inside it, investigators discovered a weapons cache. Loaded rifles, spare magazines, night vision goggles, handcuffs, duct tape, and a bulletproof vest with "police" emblazoned across the chest. But the most chilling discovery was a laminated list of names, 70 individuals, all high-ranking Minnesota lawmakers and political advocates. Each name had a red or green star. Red for urgent targets. Green for possible future phases. Detailed notes followed each entry, work schedules, family members, vacation days. His manifesto, titled "No Kings, A Purge of Tyrants," contained rambling anti-government rants, biblical citations, and calls to arms. It was clear this wasn't an isolated spree, it was a calculated ideological crusade. Boelter ditched the SUV near a creek and hiked 2 miles to a parking lot where he had stashed a second getaway vehicle, a dusty Buick sedan purchased days earlier under a false name. From there, he zigzagged through small towns, paying cash for fuel, switching outfits at rest stops. Police helicopters, drones, and tactical teams spread across the region. A breakthrough came when a trail camera on private land near Green Isle captured a blurry image of a man with a rifle slung over his shoulder, heading toward a wooded ravine. The photo hit local news within hours. The public was warned, "Do not approach. Armed and dangerous." Panic began to ripple statewide. At the Boelter family's remote cabin, FBI agents uncovered scorched blueprints, survival manuals, and a burned metal box containing 2 burner phones. In a locked drawer, they found letters Boelter had written to his sons, apocalyptic sermons about a second American Revolution. His wife, Jenny, received a cryptic message on her phone, "Dad went to war last night. Don't try to find me. It's already done." She was taken in for questioning. Though no evidence confirmed her involvement, speculation spread quickly. News vans parked outside their home. Boelter's sons, dazed and ashamed, gave a statement. "We denounce all actions. He does not represent us. He never did." Their names would forever be tied to his. Years before the shootings, Boelter had worked for a medical transportation service, shuttling human remains between hospitals, morgues, and crematoriums. Co-workers recalled him as polite but disturbingly quiet. He often rode alone, preferring graveyard shifts. Once, during a training session, he reportedly said, "They don't argue when they're dead." At first, it was brushed off as dark humor, but later reflections painted a darker profile. Inside his journal, investigators found sketches of caskets, imagined funeral programs for lawmakers, and diagrams of staged martyrdoms. He had romanticized death, not as an end, but as a cleansing ritual. This former transporter had turned executioner. Every body he once moved had become a metaphor for what he now considered his sacred duty. Governor Tim Walz stood solemnly behind a podium as dozens of microphones pointed at his pale, weathered face. "This is not only an attack on individuals," he said, "it is an assault on democracy itself." News outlets around the country ran continuous coverage. "Lawmaker massacre plot," headlines screamed. A wave of dread swept across Minnesota. The capital was placed on partial lockdown. Several public events were canceled. Political discourse grew tense. Pro-choice and Democratic lawmakers were offered emergency security details. Some refused to leave their homes. On social media, extremists hailed Boelter as a patriot, while the majority mourned the victims and demanded justice. The fragile boundary between political passion and political violence had been shattered. It ended in eerie silence. On the evening of June 16, a thermal drone scanning a cornfield near Green Isle picked up an irregular heat signature. Tactical teams surrounded the area, moving slowly through the waist-high stalks. As the sun set behind them, a man was spotted crawling along a ditch, dressed in camouflage, holding a scoped rifle. Officers approached with caution. "Hands in the air," they commanded. Boelter obeyed without hesitation. He raised his hands, placed the rifle down, and remained still. Not a word was spoken. One officer later described the scene as anticlimactic but terrifying. Boelter's expression was blank, as though he had completed a task and was awaiting judgment, not afraid, not remorseful, just waiting. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, survivors, and armed marshals. Boelter entered in shackles, dressed in a prison jumpsuit, a bulletproof vest strapped beneath. He had no legal representation, he refused counsel. His face was passive, drained of color. When the charges were read aloud, 7 counts of murder, 9 of attempted murder, 18 counts of terrorism, he offered no reaction. The judge asked, "Do you understand the gravity of these charges?" Boelter simply nodded. During the entire arraignment, he spoke only twice. First, to confirm his name. Second, to say, justice requires sacrifice. It was the only philosophy he'd ever lived by. The victims' families watched with held breath, awaiting the trial that would determine the legacy of this calculated massacre. In court, the echo of grief was unbearable. Yvette Hoffman, still healing from her wounds, testified from a wheelchair. "Every knock on the door now feels like a threat," she said, her voice trembling. "My husband can't sleep. My daughter won't speak of that morning." Dozens of families stepped forward, recounting fear, sleepless nights, broken trust. Prosecutors outlined Boelter's manifesto and timeline in painstaking detail, calling it a blueprint for terror. The defense, despite Boelter's refusal, was court-appointed and called for psychological evaluation. But mental health experts agreed. He was not delusional, just radicalized. It was not insanity. It was ideology turned violent. The echoes of his crimes extended far beyond the courtroom, destabilizing faith in public safety and the power of civil discourse. Psychiatrists, FBI profilers, and journalists dissected his past. Boelter had once been a quiet father, Sunday school volunteer, and small business operator. But after losing his job during the pandemic, his worldview spiraled. He fell into online echo chambers, absorbing conspiracy theories and radical manifestos. He began posting cryptic messages: corruption must be excised. Where laws fail, the blade must act. The mask he wore was symbolic. He didn't just hide his face, he believed he had transcended identity. He saw himself as a messenger of divine retribution. Every bullet fired was, in his mind, an act of judgment. Every politician targeted was a false prophet. His mind had fractured, not through trauma, but belief. The most dangerous kind. The final verdict came on a rainy afternoon. Boelter was sentenced to life in prison without parole. No chance of appeal. No final address. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Boelter simply stared ahead, hands folded in prayer. Outside, protests flared, some calling for his execution, others strangely praising his cause. Minnesota moved swiftly to tighten security protocols. State lawmakers received panic buttons and armored vehicle options. A scholarship fund was established in the names of Melissa and Mark Hortman. The state mourned, but also questioned. How did this happen? Could it happen again? In the closing pages of Boelter's manifesto were 6 handwritten words: "If silence ruled, I responded loud." Those words now haunted a state, and a nation, that was learning just how fragile peace could be.